Hi, all. This is Charlie and Nicole
Hello, hello.
and Beth McCrave. Hi. And we're here in the podcast To Hell and Back. And I think we're just going to jump in because this is actually a podcast number 2 in a series, because we did a podcast already, and maybe you've already seen it or heard it, or you could go back to it, about Beth's experience of her son, Ross, who took his life 2 years ago at the age of 24. And we were learning about Ross and his development, his life, and Beth, what it was like to be with him as he grew up last time. And if you didn't hear this last time, I highly recommend it. This was an incredible young man, sort of remarkable, charismatic. We had a lot of major troubles, as Beth put it, I think last time. He was the source of a lot of crying, and he was the source of a lot of laughter. And he was in his own ways, he was a genius, and he was very smart. So I recommend that. We got up to the point that he had not yet taken his life when we went through the story last time. But we wanted to get started now with some reflections before we get to that point about what it was like to be Beth. And her husband is not on the screen, but she has a husband who was also there, and she has a son who was also around some of the time, and a son's fiance, and they actually are going to appear in a future podcast very soon to talk about their experiences. But we wanted to talk about what it's like to be a family member, a parent in particular, when you have your son struggling so much and in the household and not knowing what to do and not hearing much from him, and just, what that's like, because a lot of people just may know something about what it's like to be in his shoes, because maybe you're a therapist or maybe you've known somebody, but some people don't realize what it's like to be a family member in that environment. So Beth has agreed to talk about what that was like and recall some of those things. And so, Nicole and I are just going to be a supporting cast here.
Yeah.
As we really, Beth is the one who knows about this and has also done lots of teaching in family connections about what it's like to be a family member and how to be skillful as a family member. But I think she found it's really hard to be skillful in this situation. So, Beth, I'm just going to turn it over to you. If you would sort of tell us what it was like to be his mom in the house in those, I went for quite a while, but at least those final months of his life.
Well, it was a very long haul for us, for sure. And it was a daily thing. And it was very difficult it's difficult to be skillful even when you know some skills, just because your emotions get in the way. They definitely get in the way. And that can be fear and hopelessness, and also just grief about the way things are going. I think family members, and including our family, you're just on the front lines every day. So sometimes there can be hopeful or good things happening, and still you can feel like you don't want to get your hopes up too much, because so many things have not lasted in the past. So the main point that I wanted to make, I think, is that if you are a clinician and you haven't had the opportunity, or you haven't worked with families, then I think it's easy to, if you see a kid, once a week or something, it's easy to think, oh, well, you should be doing this or you should be doing that, and that will help your situation. And it's just nowhere near that easy. And I see that a lot in family connections, because people, family members come in, and really for the very first time when they talk to other family members, they are understood, because not even, your close friends, really people who aren't living that kind of situation don't really understand. And so it's a very hard thing to talk about, because if you talk about it with your friends, people will offer advice. I got advice like, well, sign him up for a yoga class. And I thought, yeah, great. I'll do that. Things like that. And it's well-meaning, but it doesn't understand. There's not an understanding of the depth of the suffering that's happening in your house in front of you, and what that makes the whole house feel like. Like for us, when he was really depressed, it felt like the whole barometric pressure of the house just dropped, and it was really like a physical feeling and like a cloud over the house. And it was very, very challenging to not respond to that sometimes, but also very challenging to not let it suck you down into that same feeling and not be able to then be helpful at all. And so really that's what family members need, I think, is just they need support for sure, but they need a lot more than that. I think they really just need skills to be able to regain some balance in their lives and in their family, because you get so burnt out. You just want, you're just giving and giving and giving and trying things. And once you're burnt out, you're not helping anyone.
So Beth, one thing you're saying, I think that it's important to grasp, is that this is not something that comes in pulses where, there's a bad 10 minutes here and a bad conversation there, and the kid doesn't come for breakfast or dinner, so you're upset. It's sort of, when you said barometric pressure to lead this off, it's sort of like, it's all the time. Yeah. It's all the time.
Yeah. For us, it was over the course, really up and down naturally, but over the course of a decade, that, you're just experiencing these things. And we kind of did feel like it seemed like no matter what we tried and how much I kind of vowed that we would never go back to this isolation that he was doing, it always seemed to gravitate. It always seemed to end up there. It always seemed like he was gravitating back towards isolation, and we were trying to fight that isolation. And so it's pretty all-consuming. It's consuming for yourself as a person, but it's also consuming for your relationship, because he was living with us, and so a vast majority of our conversations centered around, what are we going to do now? What are we going to try next? What's happening? And so it can take over your life. And we, I do see a lot of burned out family members coming into Family Connections, because of course that would happen. And I think, so it's really important that family members, if they can, learn those skills, because if you put a kid in DBT, and they learn about validation and they learn about mindfulness and acceptance, and, it's helpful, of course, but it's not so helpful if a parent doesn't know what validation is. And I didn't. If you don't know what invalidation is, then you're invalidating all the time. And I wasn't a naturally validating person. I was very geared towards, let's fix this. Let's change let's change what's happening. And that was not helpful. It was just polarizing. So that's, I just think it's important for clinicians to get a wider picture of what's going on. And I see that a lot when they do come to Family Connections, because they, for the first time, they see this, a room full of 60 parents who are just like sitting on the edge of their seat, wanting to learn stuff and really, really trying to improve their situation and reconnect with their loved ones. And so that's it, really. I think it's very eye-opening to see that, and sure that there are abusive situations and parents who might be doing things intentionally, but from my experience, the vast majority of parents, they just need to know what to do. They need it now, and they need lots of it.
Beth, from your, if you wouldn't mind just painting a picture of what it looked and felt like in your home. You know, you describe kind of living on the front lines. So, you know, was it Ross spending most of the time in his room and not engaging, or was it screaming? Like, what was a day in the life?
So we had a little bit of all of that, everything. I mean, earlier on in the course of things, he was more explosive. You know, we had holes in the walls when he would get frustrated. We had lots of broken electronics. You know, things like that. And he would break things primarily, and so that did happen. And you know, once in a while, he would do risky things. You know, take the car, stuff like that. But over time, and I looking back, I can see that at some point I think he sort of realized, well, that wasn't working for him because we weren't tolerating that really anymore. And it wasn't really working. And so he went inside himself really. And so instead of, you know, he wasn't in DBT at that time. So instead of learning to express himself, he really just went inward. And then it became the isolation and being in his room and staying up all night and becoming almost nocturnal and sleeping during the day, which was very hard for me to go by, you know, his room at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and know that he, you know, not know even if he's awake or not. And I tried lots of things about that, but in the end, I tried, you know, to be more accepting of what was happening. And it did, I think, improve our relationship because I sort of dropped my agenda for a while. And I think, so we had better moments of connection in that way. But it's very hard just to not get sucked down yourself so that you are also feeling depressed and also, you know, not able to function as well. And I did for a long time. I just stayed home before I really learned any skills. I mean, I just stayed home, and I thought that was the thing to do. And I would, you know, just work on different things and try different strategies. And he hated it, and it wasn't, you know, didn't work for me. So I think it's just trying to strive for that balance where you can be supportive as you can, and also have a life of your own that's worth living. That's the tricky part because it takes over, definitely takes over. And it's not just parent relationships. I don't want to, you know, in family connections, I mean, there's spouse relationships, sibling relationships, grandparent relationships, children of, so it's all, it affects, you know, it affects all relationships. In our house, you know, sometimes he would come for holidays and sometimes he wouldn't. And that's really hard to explain to your 86-year-old mom, you know, where's Ross? Like, well, he's not feeling it today, you know, and it's very hard to do that. But we learned that, you know, when he could come, he would come. And when he couldn't come, he couldn't come. And that's the way it was.
Very hard to imagine if you're in this situation, then any effort that you make to communicate, to ask questions, how are you doing today, Ross? Or what are you thinking? How about this afternoon, Ross? Or how about if we go to the store and do this, Ross? It's sort of like, because every parent cares about their kid. So every parent's thinking, what can I do? What can I do?
Right.
My son it's 1 p.m. He doesn't work. He's not going to school. He was a kid with enormous promise, and he's sleeping away the day, and God knows what he's doing at night.
Right.
And so what do I do now? And then you try something and it doesn't work. So how to not try too much and how to not try too little. How to find some balance, which changes over time, I'm sure. But
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes he, you know, I mean, and I would just jump at the chance if, you know, because once in a while he would suggest, you know, going to a bookstore that he would want to go to. And, you know, at that, I would just drop everything and go because it was not so frequent. So, yeah, it's it's just a very much of a daily thing. And you can also get to be when he was in, I felt like over time, especially towards the end, it felt like he was almost making himself invisible a little bit. Like he just was shrinking. And certainly his world was shrinking, but it also felt like he was just, kind of making himself invisible. And that is different than if someone is making a hole in the wall. And and in some ways it can make you feel a little complacent. Like, okay, well, maybe this is a little better, but it's certainly not. And I felt towards the end, I've thought that isolation, I think really isolation should be thought of as self-harm. And I don't, I know, in DBT terms, it's tissue damage and all that kind of stuff, but isolation really is self-harm. And he used to try to convince me that, I don't need people, Emily Dickinson, just isolated. And then I'd say, well, dude, write some poems, or something. But it was, just this kind of telling me that he didn't need to do anything with people. And everyone, it's just humans are wired to be social. And he was not being social at all.
And it really didn't lend itself to, like, okay, Ross, you're living at home, so as long as you're here, we want you to participate in some chores. I mean, that would be almost, like, you just laughed, because I was just thinking, that would be a joke, talking to him the way you've described it up to now, right? Or was there an opening for things like
there
that?
was sometimes. It was very mood dependent. A lot of stuff was very mood dependent, and also about how we approached it. So we learned to approach it in a more skillful way. But there were times when he would pitch in and do stuff, and then there were times when he was just making a mess, and I'd come down in the morning after he'd been up all night, and there was just stuff everywhere. And so that's another thing, it's hard to not get frustrated with that. It's hard to not get resentful, even though he is, I know that he's suffering. I know that he was bored out of his mind. I know that he was profoundly lonely. I knew those things. And at the same time, you're constantly thinking, well, just do something, like just take a step, and it didn't seem to change for a very long time, really. And if anything, yeah. And
Beth, to what degree was explicitly suicide in the air?
Well, this was hard because, and I wish that we listened more to this, but he was telling me, from a younger age, he was saying, well, look, I'm not going to live a long life. His plan originally, he told me I'm going to live till 21. That's what he told me, till 21. And so I thought, okay. And then he got to be 21. On his 21st birthday, I asked him what he wanted for his birthday. And he said, nothing, I need nothing. And then he said, well, actually, I'd like a plane ticket to Denmark because they have assisted euthanasia there. And that's what he said. And so, I think he just really wanted me to know how hard his life was. And then, after his 21st birthday, which we made it through, birthdays were not good because I felt like they were a marker he felt they were a marker to another year where he was a failure, another year not doing anything. And then he said, well, maybe I'll make it to 30. Maybe I'll live to 30. And I thought, what a terrible thing to think. But I thought, oh, good, 30, I have this many more years to try other things, And, right. He didn't. But he told us in so many ways, he just said, he would say, give all the money to Teddy because I'm just, he's going to have kids and stuff with Mariah and I'm just going to die. Like he would say stuff like that, not in a threatening way, but in a very matter of fact way. And he had a firm belief. He just had a very, very firm belief that it was very black and white. If things got not bearable, that he would kill himself, and that there was nothing in between. It was just there. He didn't really like or live in gray areas at all. It was just very black and white thinking. And no, it was kind of like having a friend in his back pocket. Suicide. It's just like this. If things get bad, this is what I can do. This is what I have. And
Go ahead, Nicole.
when you hear that a lot, you can get almost used to that kind of talk, and then and I would see him sort of go down into a depressive episode and then sort of claw his way back out. And we saw him do that many, many times over the years with whatever skills he had. He would seem to come out. And so you start to think, okay, he can do it. If he gets, really depressed, he can get himself out. But what a life, and how exhausting is that? And he would tell us how, my life is so hard, especially if he'd been drinking with Teddy or the kids. He would say, my life is so hard. And still, we only saw, I think that we saw just the tip of the iceberg and how much he was really suffering. That's what I think.
So what was it like to experience him at the moments where he had clawed out, where he maybe was doing a little bit better and to maybe have a little more hope, and then to go in that kind of up and down, to be in that volatility?
That was awful, because I often felt like he was stably unstable. That was how I would describe him. I felt like that was the case, and he would try these things of his own devices, and of course he was doing all this reading about philosophy and stuff, and he would try these things, but after a while I became just cautious about letting my hopes get up, because I had seen so many times that he would try these things and then crash. And sometimes at first Teddy and I and Ted, we'd think, well, is it something that we said or did that caused him to go back sort of in the hole? And one day he told me, he just said, no. He said, it just, it's not always related to something. He said, sometimes it just happens. And so he did express that. He needed just a lot of support that he didn't have, and that he wouldn't avail himself of. He knew very well that there was nothing that we would have done, or no place we would have gone to help him. And in some ways, I think maybe that was not such a good thing, because I think he might have thought if he tried something and then he failed at it, then, it's just another thing that he failed at. And I do think that he felt that things were his fault at this point, and that he was a burden. I do think.
I want to say, I'm, as you would know, but people listening wouldn't necessarily, or wouldn't have any way of knowing, that during those 2 years before he took his life, you would come every once in a while to where I am in Northampton to consult with me and talk about what to do. And so everything you're saying, I would just totally agree with, and also add to that. You were spending day and night trying to think, should we get harder on him?
Yeah.
And push him out, or make him go somewhere, or draw the line, or kick him out of the house, because then maybe he'll face natural consequences? Or do we let him stay? Do we send messages to him? It's almost like, he's on a outward bound trip and he's in the 3 days of isolation at the end of the trip. And should we send him a little message in a bottle, so to know we're still here? I mean, it's sort of like, how do we position ourselves? And, to your credit, I mean, you tried every type of position, and it was very hard. And consulting to you, I felt too like I was trying to figure out, like where to go with this, because and it was always this sort of dilemma about, do I crash into his life and make something happen, or do I stand on the sidelines and wait for him to do something and then support it? I mean, and I think that actually is what most parents go through one way or another. You happen to be an incredibly resourceful, smart, dedicated person who's willing to do anything for this boy. I mean, at one point, if I remember right, you helped him move out to a little house nearby or something like that, right? I mean, I forget why.
We did. So we did, because we did, we kept thinking, I didn't want to, I really, at this point, he's in his early 20s. I didn't want to infantilize him in that. I wanted him to be able to, have, some money, within limits, and just be able to, do things for himself. And sometimes that would work for periods of time. And so we did put him in a little house near a golf course not far from here that was rented. And after a while, I mean, he had so much social anxiety that this house was in view of the street and in view of the golf course, part of the golf course kind of thing. And so, one day he said to me, he goes, the place was in Eastman. He goes, I'm kind of like the Boo Radley of Eastman. Like, he goes, I just stay in the house. And sometimes, and so it would have had to be this perfect situation, right, where he was in a place that had no view of any person. And then, right, maybe but then, I often thought about that. I thought, well, then what? Then he's, maybe he has to get his own groceries and stuff, but then he's sitting in the house by himself. And my husband is also running over there and bringing him sandwiches and stuff because, then you worry about what's happening exactly.
Right.
Because
Right.
So geographically changing the place isn't necessarily always the answer. I mean, I feel like sometimes when we left the house, he would step up. If we went away, he would step up, because then he sort of he was constantly complaining about having no purpose in life. That was a very big thing. And when we left, then he was responsible for the dogs. He was responsible to check the oil. He was responsible for things and getting, his own stuff in the house. And so sometimes that would be a good thing. But I think all these things kind of run their course, or they seem to run their course, and they're not the complete answer, because he really still, at his age, he needed to be around other kids his age. That's what he really, or somebody. And in town, everybody had left. All his other friends there in college, they're doing amazing things. And even when they called him, what's he going to say? Yeah, I'm sitting here. I saw a great movie last night, and meanwhile, his friends are in medical school. So it becomes, I think, I don't think that, sometimes you might think, well, you have plenty of time to deal with this and work on this with a kid, but I don't think that's true for him. I think he felt like the window that he had to be normal was closing really fast. And I felt like if he didn't go to college right then, he was so far behind, is how he felt, different to what we might think, where we'd think, oh, so what if you're in college when you're 30, or so what if you're 35? Right. But for him, no, that window was closing, and he felt it very strongly. And it's a time limited thing, I think.
So torturous. It's so torturous.
Yes.
Hey, Beth, could you tell us what happened in terms of when he took his life, and how you discovered that, and what that was like? I hesitate to even ask, because it has to be such painful moments, but I know you've been through it in your mind 1,000 times. I wonder if you can share that with people, what the experience was, and then after that we're going to go on to what it was like to deal with that going forward.
Yeah. So we were, Ted and I, my husband and I were away. We were actually in Hawaii, so we were like 5,000 miles away. And but we felt okay about this because he was with Teddy. So COVID, this was May. This happened May of 2020. COVID was, just starting, and people weren't sure about it. So Teddy and Mariah had moved up to our house in New Hampshire from Boston because it was safer, and they were working remotely from our house. So they were with him, actually, like physically with him, and we felt good about that. It seemed like that would be a good thing, and so it was May 12th when we heard about it. It was a 6-hour time difference. So it was 3:30 in the morning there. And we got a call, and it was from Teddy. And he was just, he said, he did it. He fucking did it. He killed himself. And he couldn't hardly talk, and he was just sobbing. And that's how we heard about it. And my first thought was all I could think about was I just wanted to get to him. I wanted to get to Teddy because I didn't want him to be by himself. And I actually got off the phone and I called my friend Laura, who is a very close friend and knows Teddy, knows Ross, knows our whole family. And she was out the door before I even hung up, and she was there in probably 5 minutes flat. And she stayed with him, and I was talking to him more on the phone. And then, of course, then it's like, then the police were there and the medical examiner was there, and all this stuff that you would never even know about. Like they're asking me questions. And I was thinking like, what, you're asking me these questions right now? And I didn't realize till much later that during this time, until they figured what was happening, Teddy was a suspect, like actually. And so that didn't even occur to me. And so it was just all this stuff. And it was just very surreal. And so Ted started calling his family. I called my brother, just so that I asked my brother to tell my mom, because I didn't feel like I could do that. And then I called my dad. But then I really just wanted to focus on getting home. That was what I wanted to do. And at that point, everything was shutting down. So there were hardly any flights. And I would book a flight and an hour later would get canceled. So because they were consolidating all the flights, no one was flying anymore. And so I booked 3 flights. 2 of them got canceled and we got 1. And so we got out that evening and we flew it was 18 hours. We just flew. And I just remember like sitting in the airport looking at this guy who was in a full-on hazmat suit with, goggles and everything, and just staring at him. I was just crying, and it didn't feel as real as it might have if we were home, because we weren't home, and I wasn't seeing this stuff. So we got home anyway. We got home, and we saw Teddy right away. Teddy would not come back to the house. So he left the house. Mariah and her mom came down from Hanover, about half an hour away. They came down and got him. And brought him back up to their house. And Laura picked us up at the airport. We got back, and we saw Teddy, but he wouldn't come to the house. Matter of fact, he's not slept a night in this house since, ever. And he'll come to the house now, but that's it. And so we saw Teddy, and then the next day we went to the funeral home. Also, just a very surreal experience. I wrote about what it was like at the funeral home. I can read what I wrote if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wrote, I remember after we left Ross at the funeral home thinking, I want to bring him home and put him in bed so that I can find him and not Teddy. And I just want him to be here for a while longer. I also don't know exactly when they took him to be cremated, and I thought he shouldn't go alone. And how does that all work anyway? But then it was done, and Ted and I were standing in the funeral home arguing about urns in that surreal room until we had to just leave everything there. So how do you pick out an urn, and what does it matter anyway? And so that's what I wrote, because it I just can't. It just was very, I think, honestly, I think the whole first year is just learning to believe that this really happened. That's what it was for me anyway. It's just little by little, then your brain like lets in whatever it can, and you do that.
Yeah.
So,
and it seems like your first instinct was to be a mom to Teddy and to take care of
yes.
him. So you're grappling both with wanting to protect and help him go through his own grief, and you're dealing with your own, which just seems enormous.
I don't think I was really dealing with my own things then, really. At that moment, I mean, a little bit. I guess I had to for sure. But my primary focus at that time was I just wanted Teddy and Mariah to be okay. And so I just wanted to make sure. And so I called Alan Frizzetti, because, I mean, at this point, one thing that was true is that a lot of my friends are therapists because of NEA. And so I called Alan just to get a recommendation for a trauma therapist for Teddy. And that made me feel a lot better. I just wanted to get that in motion, because I was scared, I was scared for him, but I know he'll talk about it too. His friends just rallied. Like, he has a lot of good friends, but his friends just rallied around, like they just showed up. And I think that's the thing that you remember, is the people who just they just appear. Like, they drop work, they drop whatever, and they just appear, and they don't know what they're going to do, but they're definitely going to be there. And that was true for me, but it was, really true for Teddy, I think.
I think something should be said here too, Beth, because he isn't on and he's not going to be on the podcast, about your husband and how he was coping, because he had such a different style than you.
He did, and that was something, that was something that I didn't expect would be so hard. Like, I had kind of tried over the years to almost even picture, like, what if this happened, because he talked about it so much. But the picture is just, you find out, the picture's different than the reality. And so Ted was, he gravitated towards his family in a big way. And so while we were trying to get ready to even fly home, he was mostly on the phone with his family. And then he just needed to be with his family, I think. And I, it would be, I mean, Alan said to me, well, you could comfort each other. And I thought, yeah, no, I can't. I have nothing in me. I have no space in me for anybody else right now, except maybe to think about Teddy. But I just, I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it at all. And so it was very hard for me to have Ted in the house, honestly, because I'd be upstairs and he'd be downstairs, and I could hear him crying, and I could hear him talking to Ross out loud, and it was awful. I mean, it was like being stabbed, and I kind of felt like he was doing it to me, and that's not the case at all. But it felt like it hurt me so much that I thought, you need to just stop that, because I couldn't handle it. And it's awful that I couldn't, but I couldn't. And so he would go to his family for pretty long stretches of time, and I think that was a good thing. He has a big family, lots of siblings and people. Mm-hmm. And so he went there, and then he threw himself into golf. And, but it was a very long time that happened, that I would hear him, and I'd almost become like vigilant to it. I'd hear him like crying or talking to Ross, and it was, really, really bad. So that's kind of how we kind of went our separate ways, I feel like, for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And luckily, I think, we've been married for almost 40 years, So Nicole's thinking, oh, you got married when you were 12. No, but I mean, we've been married for a very long time. And I think that was a good thing, because it wasn't I felt like we were going to split up or anything, but we just kind of drifted away for a little while, and that's what worked for us. And
well, and one of the things, what you used to tell me too is, and I don't think this is, out of bounds to just mention that, though Ted isn't here, is that he would when Ross was alive, one way he would relate to Ross was take him driving. They would just get in the car and go on what I think you called random rides.
That's right. Yeah, they
So-
did that for years
For
and
years.
years.
Random,
That was
just-
always Ted is very different than me. Ted, Ted is a very validating person, and he just kind of rolls with like, well, this is happening, and he's not very as change oriented as I am, and so he would just every day pretty much say to Ross, I'm going to get coffee. Do you want to come? And half the time Ross would say no, and half the time he'd say yeah. And then he knew if you get in the car, in the beginning, he would get in the car without his shoes because he knew if he got in the car without his shoes, then you don't have to get out anywhere. There's no expectation of that, really. And so, they just would go. I mean, there's hundreds of miles of back roads in New Hampshire and Vermont, and they would just drive around, sometimes for hours, just drive around. And Ross was always very grateful for that. He always thanked Ted. He'd say, thanks, Dad. That he called him that, and he would just say that. It balanced out, I think, because Ted would do that, and meanwhile I'd be over here like strategizing. So it was just a strange situation, but it was the way it was.
Yeah. Hey, could you start now in terms of getting into what it's been like now? I don't think there's any obvious best way to do this because there's so much to it, and there's way too much to say. But one of the things that stood out to me, and I wonder if you could start there, was to say the role of your best friend Laura in this, because that really was striking to me.
Yeah. So Laura, she was our neighbor. She lives now in the next town over, but we've been friends. We've been exercising together pretty much daily for, 20 years or something. And she's a very steady person. She's very consistent. She's very kind of naturally validating and very, she's a person I could count on probably more than anybody I know in my life, really. And so when this happened, she was there for us in the biggest way possible, of course, for Teddy. And then she picked us up at the airport. And then when I came home and then, she was working remotely too. And she said, well, like maybe, why don't we just do what we always have done and we'll just walk. And so we did. We walked 5 miles in the morning and 5 miles in the afternoon every day.
Wow.
And that was like, I don't know, I didn't have any, but I didn't want to talk to a lot of people, honestly. I really didn't want to talk to a lot of people. I wanted to hide. And so that was something I could do. So, and Laura is if I wanted to talk, I could talk. If I didn't want to talk, I didn't have to talk. And we just walked, and we walked really fast. And so we walked really fast, and so I didn't have to think. I was just walking really fast and breathing. And that was really good. And some days I would come home and just go back to bed and wait until the afternoon walk. And that's all I accomplished. But that was something that I did. And it was kind of a natural thing for me to do. And it was probably a good thing that we did that also because I was eating ice cream, mostly only that. And so really, or junk food, or just like, I don't know, I couldn't imagine like cooking anything. And we'd have sandwiches, maybe we'd have a sandwich, but mostly I just wanted to eat junk because it just felt good. And so that's what I did. I mean, I know some people don't eat anything, but I just ate junk, and I ate a lot of ice cream. And so that's kind of the way the days went. So Laura was very, and still is, and was always, whatever was going on for me on any particular day, she's there. She's just one of those people, is what I meant, is that she's just there. And that is, what I needed. I had her, and then I had you later on, to talk to. And so it was like, I thought of it like my home and away team, kind of. It was that is what I was very grateful for that, because I don't know, my head just probably would have exploded that's how it felt. It felt like my head would have exploded.
Now, did you keep doing, I'm trying to remember what you dropped doing, what you were able to keep doing, because, you were a very busy family connections teacher.
Yes.
And you had projects related to that. And you did a lot of hiking and camping, or at least hiking a lot.
Hiking. Yeah, I was on the board at that time, and in the beginning, it's interesting. I thought, I kind of tried in the beginning to go back to maybe like try to go back to the person that I was. And and you can't, or at least you can't do that. It doesn't work. And so, but I tried that. And in about 2.5 weeks afterwards, I was asked to participate in a training that Alan was doing. And, just a simple part of it, like a breakout room or something. And I did that, and I did it. And I don't know, I shouldn't have done it probably, but I did. And because I could do it in my sleep, it didn't require a lot of thought, but I don't think that was the smartest thing to do really, but I did do it. And I don't know, but it became pretty clear early on that I couldn't, I wasn't gonna be going back to the person that I was. It was just not going to happen. So I needed to figure that piece out. And I think really the first thing I had to, I know we've talked about this, but guilt was a very big deal. And that was something that I had to work through very hard. So
say more about that, because I think that it's so common. I mean,
yes.
that I think it'd be valuable for other, whether it's family members listening or clinicians listening or who, other,
yes.
Anybody. What was it like?
It was unbearable. It was really, because in the beginning, it was like an endless loop in my head, and it was just going around and around, and it was all about, how it was, in all the ways that it was my fault. Did I miss signs? Was I practicing acceptance, but really I'd given up on him? Was I selfish? All these things that I was thinking. And so I couldn't, it was really, really awful. And so finally I thought, what is it? What could make me feel better about this? And so I came up with this idea, and this is really what I thought. And I thought, if there was a suicide court, then that would be what I would do. And I was really thinking about it. Like, I thought I'd go in there, and there would be a jury, and I would lay out all the facts. I'd lay out, like, this is what I did, this is what I didn't do. And then the jury would, of course, they would say, yes, you were guilty of these things, and then this is your punishment. And that, when I thought that, I thought, well, maybe that would really make me feel better if that was a thing. And of course, it was just very narrow. It was very, very narrow thinking. And what I finally did was, after this went on for a very long time, and you go through all these scenarios of what could be different, and it's not different. And so then it's just the dead ends all around. And finally, I thought, you know what? I knew that I wanted to move forward. I knew that, and so I thought, I'll just take a piece of that guilt, like a little piece of it, and I'll put it inside me, and I'll just keep it there. And that, but I won't let it stop me, like from moving forward. So that is what I did. And that made me feel okay. Like, it felt like an okay solution, that I had some of that. I wasn't like acquitted really, but I had some of that in me, but I could still move forward. And so that's kind of how I came around to thinking about it. And my view of it expanded, because as I started to talk to other people who he was close with, I recognized that everybody felt that way. So his friend Alex, he had called her the week before and started talking about, what do you think it's like to die? And she was telling me this, and so she, of course, felt like, but wasn't an atypical thing for him. And then pretty much everyone, said, oh, if I had done this, or I should have done this, or, would the outcome have been different? So I started to see how everyone was thinking about it from their own point of view. And it was very centered on your own self, and not so much on what Ross might be thinking, or what really was going on with him. So that was helpful finally to realize, but it is an awful thing. And Alan was helpful actually too. I wrote what he told me. I can read it to you if you want.
Sure, do.
one day I was just outside and he just caught me on a super bad day. I was just pacing and just thinking about all this stuff and I couldn't stop. And so he just happened to text me, and then we talked, and he said, I just said he has good metaphors and strategies. I told him about my suicide court idea, and he followed it with a thought experiment. He asked if I would convict myself if I was a juror or an observer. And then he also spoke about responsibility and the fact that it has the word response in it. He said, if we were on a huge barge and Ross fell or jumped in, what could we do? If we go out with the dinghy to help, he still has to climb into the dinghy to be saved. He might perceive that he can't do it, or he might not want to. And then I thought he might not think the dinghy is a better place or safer even than he is in the water. And I felt like we rode around in that dinghy for a really long time. And it also felt like sometimes I jumped in the water with him for a while. And so I thought, that point I thought, I realized that I have to use all the skills that I already know, but use them in this context. So it's a little like starting over again. And I can choose to be effective and move forward. He said, picture yourself in a big field with a line in it. And one side of the line is moving forward and one side is moving backward. But it's a really long 180-degree line. So there's many, many things I can choose to do to move forward. And it doesn't really matter what. But that thing will be better than going backwards and having to come all the way back again or going in circles. So at that moment, he just caught me at a right time at that moment. I needed something simple I could put in my head, and that was helpful. And then at the end, he said, leave room for joy. And I thought, yeah, no, that's like, nope. No, that, I thought, and I couldn't, that part like didn't register at all, until way later. But anyway, that's kind of what I went through with that.
Were you able to leave room for joy as time went by?
Yeah, you know what? Now, not for a very long time. Now, I think of Natalia's podcast too. If anybody has not listened to that, Natalia was super helpful to me. That podcast ultimately was really helpful to me. And she talks about complicated joy. And I think that's a really good word because it is complicated. And later on, if I would, suddenly feel like I was having a good day, immediately it would be followed by sadness or bad feelings or just not good feelings. So I never saw those two so close together before because that happened repeatedly where you have a good day and then you feel bad the next day because of that. But Natalia was we wrote back and forth a few times and she actually was very helpful to me.
Let me just say, because people listening, Natalia was a young psychologist or student at the time, and we did a podcast, or three podcasts, I think, a long time ago, after the death of her 2-year-old son, shortly after his birthday, when he had been perfectly healthy. And so she talked about the grief and how she had coped with that. So I just wanted to add that.
When I listened, it wasn't until probably a year later on, I thought, I should listen to this again. And so I did. I listened to her podcast again. And of course, I had listened to them before, but not in this context. And so I listened to them. And my thought of her was that she was, and I told her this, I said, I think that you're like an emotional, badass Wonder Woman. Like, that's how I thought of her, honestly. And I thought, and she said, well, I'm going to put that on my door now. but I that's how I really thought of her because she just went for it in a way that it took me a year or more before I could do, some of those things. And so then I started thinking, at that time, I started thinking, I need to become more of an emotional badass. Like, because I'm not good at that. I'm just not, I can do all kinds of physical things. I really can. And I'd rather, way rather. But that was a turning point, I think, in my head for, how I needed to move forward, like you said, you suggested that I lean in more. And so that's what I needed to do.
Along those lines, how did the way that you talk to yourself in moments of difficulty evolve and change since maybe, the years before Ross's death up through now?
Yeah. So before, I was pretty focused on just trying to figure out, not about me so much, but figure out what to do. Although I did try to focus on being accepting more. I did focus a lot on that because that was hard for me. And so I did do that. And that helped, that gave me moments of connection with him that I might not have ever had. And now, of course, those are really, really important to me. So I'm glad for that. In the beginning, when this happened, briefly, I thought, the skills are bullshit. They're just bullshit because they didn't work. They didn't work for me. I kind of thought like maybe they'd be some kind of a talisman, against what happened. And of course, that's not accurate. But I did think that. And then over time, I think the way that you talk to yourself about guilt is a very big deal. And so I would have to it's a choice. Yeah. I think you have it's a choice. You can stay in it, which is very, very miserable, or you can, find ways to go out of it. And sometimes I would look, I have hundreds and hundreds of emails that I wrote on his behalf to all kinds of people, wherever he was. And so I would look at those and I would think, why I wrote all those, like I did that. And so, and I know that we suffered at all of us. So it is sometimes you just have to really flip it over and think about it in a different way, or you just you can't function. And I knew that I wanted to be living again. Like I knew that. I did know that. But that I think is a choice too. But I knew that for me, I wanted to, for me and for Teddy and for Ross and Mariah. I mean, well, for Ross too, but for Mariah and Ted, I wanted to. And then I thought, well, then what? So do I do it 20% or do I do it all the way? And so I thought, well, no, I think I have to do it 100% or not. It's not going to work. So that's kind of what I did. But it is very much a day-to-day. Yeah. It was a day-to-day thing. And sometimes you just get stuck,
I think, Beth, that having seen you through this intermittently during these last couple of years, that at the beginning, you might say you were kind of disabled by the whole thing. Yes. I mean, it was just sort of like you were wounded. It was sort of like somebody who has been through a massive accident and and all you can think about at the beginning is to try to just make it day to day. I mean, that was an early part, and you would try to think of things, but at that point, there's certain suggestions that don't go very far, like throw yourself all in, or lean into it, or go do this, or be an emotional badass, and all of this kind of stuff.
That's a year. That's a year
down the road, and I'm glad you're emphasizing that because really, this past year, it's been different.
Yes,
your tone has been different. You've connected and heard from people who touched Ross's life and who he touched. You've heard from all these different people, and that has been supportive of you. Just to realize, he's still so much alive in so many people's minds. He made such a difference to so many people, even in his own strange life that he lived. I mean, in his own isolated way, he made this powerful impact. And I think you started to take that in more. You got out more. You went back to, some work projects. And it's just your tone started to be like as if, okay, now I can make the choices that I couldn't even make a year ago.
Right. No, I think that is really true. Like I said, the first year, and actually when I think that whole first year when I came to see you, what I was doing was just collecting like all the sad things, all the sadnesses, and then I would come and just like tell you them.
You just tell them.
And just tell you them. And And sometimes I'd drive away and I would think, really, Charlie didn't say very much, really. And that's because I just was telling you all these sad things. But I felt better. Like I felt lighter each time. And in retrospect, I think I should have come see you more. Like, I think I often waited. I waited until I was just like in a crisis situation. And then I would call you. And then I really did need to see you like that minute, And so I think, that is the way it went for a year, is just doing that. And then after a year, I did, it was sort of a shift, but just like, there's one other thing that I wanted to read, and this I reflected on, in the very, very early days. It was very important to me to call everyone. In the very, very beginning, I really was focused. I needed to call everyone and tell them what happened. And I really felt like I needed to do that. And I also wanted to, get some special things to some of his friends. But this is what I wrote after I had talked to some people and told them. And so I wrote, I remember talking to Lori and Nancy, and I heard the confusion in their voices about why I sounded so good. And Nancy asked, "Where do you stand on all this?" And I had made a list of people to tell, and my mouth and my body were moving, but I wasn't really all there and not feeling it fully. And somewhere my head was saying, well, I am telling you this, but it's not really real. And I will maybe call you back and have to tell you that everything is okay after all. And it wasn't real. And this wasn't conscious, but somewhere. So I was detached and more emotionless. But now I think, where is he? And is he okay? And is he even? And Ted said, I can't believe that all we have is ashes. And that really jolted me, because I think that too. And so, that was the way it was in the very beginning. I did really sometimes think, that he was on a trip or something and he was coming back, or that, you know that that's not true, but it's, you hear a noise in the house and you think, oh, it's him. So it just takes a lot longer than I thought. Like, it just takes a whole lot longer than I thought. And you have to be patient. And I'm not that patient. And one other person that helped me from your podcast is Cedar. So I wrote to Cedar, and she wrote back, and she said, I was asking her how she handled like the anniversary. And she said, the second year for her wasn't really very different than the first. And she said, really a turning point for her was like the third year. And so that was really helpful to me, because I felt all this pressure. After a year, I kind of thought, okay, people are going to have this expectation that I'm okay now, and I'm not. I'm just so not okay. And so that was really helpful, because the second year, I think it's the first year, like without the shock and the trauma. So it's real, like it feels really real. And so you get more sad. I felt really, really deeply like sad in my bones the second year. And it's very hard to, and at that point, people aren't asking you anymore. They're not saying, how are you? They're just like thinking, they're not talking about it. So I appreciated really when someone would say to me, like, how is it for you now? Because it sucks. It's not good.
Before we get to,
I'm curious if, you've had any kind of relationship with Ross, in your mind, in your imagination, just as time, and how that maybe has also changed or evolved.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because, I'm not a religious person. Ross wasn't either. Really, no one in our family is. I was raised Catholic, but I'm not. And so I did go see a medium, and I did that with Alex, actually, one of his good friends, Alex. We both went together, and I flat out, like I told her, I said, look, I like data, and evidence and stuff. And I said, I'm really skeptical about this. I'm just going to tell you right now. And then she said, that's fine, and I recorded it because she let me. And it was a good experience. I mean, there are certainly some things that are generic, but there's other things that I have no explanation for, really. And there are things that happened afterwards that also I have no explanation for. And I tried to explain them away, and they weren't explainable. And so that really did make me feel, if anybody could get a message through, it would be Ross. Like, actually, I think that, because he has such a, and even this medium, she said that. She goes, wow, he's so forceful. And I was like, yeah, And so that was really, I'm much less skeptical about those things now than I was before. And there were lots of things actually that happened that, for which I have no explanation. And I don't know,
That was a great question. And I wish we had more time on this particular thing. It's something I've given a lot of thought to. And but I did want to, before we got to the end, and we're sort of just within the final few minutes, I wonder if you could say a little about this event that you planned that brought together a memorial for Ross.
Right.
Yeah, I'll let you tell what you did.
So Natalia was also helpful for me here, because in the beginning, like the first year I was paralyzed, and I felt like anything I do is going to be so stupid, and he would think it's stupid, and it's not going to be big enough, and it's not going to be meaningful and all that stuff. And then, Natalia said, you can do lots of little things. And she felt the same way in the beginning. And so I had done a little AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, has these Out of the Darkness walks that they do for people who have had a suicide in their family. And so I found one online that was in New Hampshire, just like 3 weeks before it was going to happen. And I'd been thinking about what I could do. I was like agonizing over what I could do, because I felt it was time to do something. And so I saw this and I thought, well, I'll just do it. I'll just even if I'm only me going there, I'll just throw it out there. And so I put it, I signed up for it. And then of course it was on social media, which I'm also not great at, but I did it. And then all of a sudden, all these people started signing up, and Teddy was, very excited about it, and Mariah and all his frat brothers and everybody. And so it turned out to be, and then you came to it. And so it turned out to be like a really good day. We had 23 people come who was just on our team and climb this little mountain in New Hampshire that we climbed, and it's beautiful. Wow. And it was also a mountain that we had taken him up many times when he was a kid. So he'd been up there before. And so, all these people just came, and it was, and all these people donated money, and Teddy raised more money than anybody on the whole thing. And so it was just turned out to be way better than I thought it would be. And we're going to do it every year. Wow. So yeah, it was just it was very, it was a good feeling. It was a very good feeling. I really, and we were just all up there, and we just all yelled at the same time, "We love you, Ross." And it was just very, very happy that we did it. And I'm very happy that you came, and yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, me too. I got to meet, I had heard about so many people, and I got to meet, and I thought I would hang out with your husband, but he's such a fast walker. He's such a strong hiker that I was left in the dust with some sympathetic people.
Yeah,
But it was amazing. And for those who don't know, it's called Mount Major, and it overlooks Lake Winnipesaukee. So you go up to the top of this, and you have this beautiful view of this huge lake. And it was a place Ross had been. And when we put some pictures on my website where the podcasts are archived, and we haven't done that yet, but there'll be a picture from up on Mount Major of all of these people, all 23 people there. And it was a somber and joyous event. It really was. It was so deeply touching to everybody there.
Yeah, so. I think everyone recognized, it's like we hadn't had a service for him, and we certainly weren't going to go in a church, And so
sort of that.
This was that, really. This was that, and I think it felt good. And we'll do some other things, but I just think that was a really good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
did.
it was a really good thing. It's been so. I'm so appreciative that you came on here because the way you've talked about Natalia's podcast and Cedar's podcast and other things like that. There was a podcast of a man who went through the Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and To Hell and Back is the podcast, and people like you really have benefited from others. And I swear to God that what you've just done,
oh my goodness,
is going to be so helpful for so many people. It's just such a unique situation. I mean, it's not unique. It's unique for people to be out there talking about it openly the way you are, so courageously. So thanks for doing it, Beth, and for your family, because Teddy and Mariah are each going to come on in one separate podcast each, because they feel they each have such different feelings about it. So there's going to be a whole set of podcasts beginning with the previous one and then two more after this. And so thanks for coming on. And I have no doubt that I'm going to start getting messages and comments from people. I would invite them, and I'll share anything with you that comes through us. Okay?
Yeah, thank you, Beth.
You're welcome. I was very nervous about this, actually, and so I'm just glad that it went. I did, you are both easy to talk to, so it was okay. Good. And I'm also glad it's over.
Yes.
All right. Teddy and Mariah will be great. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
It was a privilege.
Stop
Thank
now.
you. Yeah.
So I want to invite everybody that listens to this to make comments, rate, review, whatever. You get any messages you can.
And share with people that might benefit. Pass it on.
Pass it on to people, because it's a kind of unique resource now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
And Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Charlie.
Bye.